The hangar doors groaned open under the weight of morning mist and Midwest wind. Inside, a dozen young airmen in crisp uniforms milled about, buzzing with pre-flight energy. They adjusted their helmets, flipped through mission briefs, and tossed half-serious jokes back and forth, their voices echoing off steel beams. It was business as usual at McCall Air Base, until she walked in. She wasn't what they expected. She was older, gray hair pulled into a tight, no-nonsense bun, boots worn down to the heel, and a flight jacket that looked like it had weathered 3 wars. Her face was weathered, too, not with age so much as experience. No medals, no applause, just quiet steps and an old duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. A second lieutenant nudged the crew chief beside him. "Hey, did somebody's grandma get lost on base?" He snickered. A ripple of chuckles followed. She heard it. Of course she did. But she didn't flinch. Didn't slow down. She walked like the air around her belonged to her, and the rest of them were just renting it. Her name was Captain Nora Whitlock. Not ma'am, not pilot, and certainly not commander. Just Nora. Like an old photograph that kept getting passed around, too familiar to throw away, too quiet to respect. She moved past the mocking looks and headed straight for the mission board. With the confidence of someone who didn't ask permission, she picked up the red grease pencil, drew a line through the open slot for Aircraft 09, and wrote one word in clean, steady block letters CLAIM'd. Then she walked out, no speech, no salute, just a fading set of boot prints and a silence so thick it muffled the engines outside. What they didn't know, what no one had thought to tell them, was that Captain Whitlock hadn't flown a military jet in over a decade. Not since her discharge after an incident so classified that most of the mission logs had been blacked out with permanent ink. The kind of mission that doesn't make the papers or even the history books. A mission that crossed into airspace the Pentagon wouldn't officially acknowledge even existed. Since then, Nora had faded into the background. Most of the men and women she'd trained were either retired or long forgotten in archived personnel files. The new commanders had inherited her name on some clearance list, but not her story. They saw her as a relic, some leftover from a bygone era, technically still allowed on base, like an antique nobody knew what to do with. But she hadn't returned for nostalgia. She came for one thing, one final flight. That afternoon, during a routine formation briefing, her presence raised eyebrows again. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The young lieutenants laughed quietly to themselves, whispering guesses about who she was. "Must be someone's aunt with honorary access," one muttered. "Or maybe a retired flight instructor." "Here to observe," said another. Captain Whitlock took a seat in the back, arms folded, eyes locked on the tactical screen. She didn't blink. Didn't even shift. When the instructor posed a question about crosswind recovery during inverted roll maneuvers, no one answered. The silence hung long enough to feel heavy. Then Nora raised her hand. The room stilled. The instructor hesitated, then nodded toward her. Her voice was soft, steady, seasoned. "At 35 knots of crosswind and 3,000 feet altitude, your instinct will be to roll. Don't, you'll lose control. Split the angle. Reduce throttle. Angle the nose 8 degrees to the left. Crosswinds won't fight you if you move with their rhythm." Silence again. This time a different kind. The kind that made young men rethink everything they thought they knew. Later that evening, someone noticed that Aircraft 09 had been pulled from storage and sent for full systems check. The pilot listed, Captain Whitlock. Her name wasn't even in the active roster, but there it was, penciled in for the next day's practice run. Rumors spread fast. "She hasn't flown since the Libya mission, right? Didn't she crash a Mirage back in 09? Nah, that was a cover story. Heard she flew solo recon over Kandahar. No escort, no backup. Just her and a classified payload." Whatever the truth was, people began watching her. Watching the way she ran diagnostics by hand. How she polished the canopy like it was a cathedral window. How she moved around that aircraft, not like a hobbyist, but like someone who knew it better than she knew herself. Young pilots started trailing her like shadows. They called it curiosity, but what they were really feeling was the hum of something ancient and undeniable respect. And still, Nora said nothing. She trained in silence. She waited in silence. And when the storm finally came, when a routine mission turned sideways in a matter of seconds, and no one else could navigate the corridor of dust and fire. Through the mountains, she flew, not because she wanted the spotlight, not because she needed redemption. She flew because no one else could. The morning buzz at McCall Air Base had the same predictable rhythm, steel doors rattling open, jet engines whining in the distance, and young pilots hustling between hangars with coffee in one hand and tablets in the other. Fresh out of flight school, their jackets still stiff with starch, they carried themselves like they had the world figured out. So when Captain Nora Whitlock showed up again, it didn't exactly stop traffic. She walked past the rows of humming aircraft, her boots landing firm on concrete polished by time and weather. Her coat wasn't new. The patches on her sleeves were so faded they looked more like shadows than insignia. Her flight bag, slung over one shoulder, sagged with weight and history. But what stood out the most was that no one acknowledged her. Not a nod, not a salute. Nothing. A few glanced her way puzzled. Most didn't even bother. "She looks like she's here to give a museum tour," someone joked. Another young airman leaned against the railing near the tarmac break room, squinting behind aviator sunglasses. "Bet she still thinks she can fly," he snorted. "Poor thing probably got lost on her way to the VA center." The comment drew a wave of laughter. Not cruel, not quite, but coated in the kind of dismissiveness only youth can deliver. It wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. No one saw her as one of them. Nora didn't stop. She didn't correct them. She didn't even blink. She moved through their space like it didn't belong to them. And maybe it didn't. Maybe it still belonged to the ones who had built the sky with their bare hands, who knew what turbulence felt like through instinct rather than instruction. She made her way to the far wall of the operations building, where the day's flight schedule was posted. Red ink marked time slots and tail numbers, next to rows of sharp, confident call signs. The only aircraft without a pilot listed was an old Rafale aircraft 09, parked out behind Hangar 6. It hadn't flown in months. Some said it was cursed. Others said it just wasn't worth repairing. Nora picked up the thick grease pencil, steadied her hand, and in deliberate all-capital letters, Rome Monarcho CK Zoder 9 Solo for Army Flig HT. Just like that, the entire boardroom seemed to freeze. A maintenance officer nearby choked on his coffee. One of the squadron techs muttered, "She can't be serious." A lieutenant stammered, She's not cleared, is she?" But Nora was already gone. She left her signature like a footprint, quiet, confident, irreversible. It wasn't a request, it was a declaration. Back in the hangar, the whispers started almost immediately. Pilots peered through windows wondering if the base commander knew. Ground crews exchanged looks. In the cockpit of conversation, doubt was the loudest noise of all. "She hasn't flown in what? 10, 15 years. I thought she was retired after that classified mess in the Persian corridor. She's got guts, I'll give her that. But this isn't nostalgia night at the VFW." Despite the stir, no one confronted her. No one told her she couldn't. And perhaps most importantly, no one stopped her. In the hours that followed, aircraft 09, once written off as a relic, was pulled from its corner of obscurity and brought into full maintenance check. Nora didn't wait for the green light. She initiated the work herself. She calibrated the hydraulic lines by hand, wiping each tool clean before moving to the next. She tested avionics, flipped switches like her fingers were playing a piano, and polished the canopy until it reflected the cold, gray sky. There was a rhythm to it, a reverence. She didn't wear earbuds or hum along to music. She worked in silence, the kind that commands attention without asking for it. One young lieutenant, Ely Travers, just 24, stood watching from the other end of the hangar, arms crossed. He was the kind who checked his flight stats before breakfast and rehearsed swagger in the mirror. Seeing Nora crawl beneath the fuselage of a Rafale he'd written off as museum grade, he couldn't help himself. "You know they've got simulators now, ma'am," he said, voice tinged with sarcasm. "A lot more high-tech than that antique." She slid out from under the aircraft, slow and calm, and looked him straight in the eyes. "Simulators don't shake. They don't scream. And they don't kill you when you're wrong," she said, voice quiet but cutting. "You can't learn respect for the sky from a monitor." He swallowed, then gave a short nod. For the first time that day, he didn't have a comeback. From that point on, more eyes began to watch. People noticed she arrived early, stayed late, ran system drills that even the newest pilots hadn't tried yet. Rumors started shifting, less snide, more curious. Some whispered about the patches she wore, ones no one recognized. Others remembered her name showing up in old mission briefings, redacted files, missions that didn't officially exist. By the end of the week, the jokes had stopped. The laughter faded. All that remained was the unmistakable hum of something rare returning to the airfield. Not Noagend, just readiness. And on the flight board, beneath layers of ink and ego, one thing stood out clear, bold, and undeniable: Waniayak Zo 9 confirmed. Captain Nora Whitlock's name wasn't new to the base, at least not on paper. Her personnel file had been passed from one commanding officer to the next like a dusty old manual that no one read, but no one dared throw away. Her clearance badge was still active. Technically, her flight certification had never been revoked. Not officially, but in every meaningful way, she had become invisible. And perhaps that had always been the point. What the young airmen at McCall didn't realize was that Captain Whitlock had once been one of the most feared, respected, and classified pilots in the United States Air Force. Her flight record was unlike any other, but very little of it was public. Even less of it was spoken aloud. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a ghost, and they used to call her Wraith. That wasn't a call sign assigned by protocol or some flight school instructor. It was earned, on storm runs through disputed airspace, on missions that never made it to command briefings, and in the cockpit of a jet that danced just outside the radar of international diplomacy. She had been part of a program known internally as Silent Sky, a highly classified flight unit designed for off-the-books missions, most of which had no names, just coordinates, timestamp, and blacked-out outcomes. The very existence of that unit was denied by every branch of government. It wasn't in the Air Force's official records. But those who had served long enough, or deep enough, knew better, and some still remembered. In a locked drawer at Base Intelligence, buried beneath stacks of outdated logistics reports, sat a faded folder labeled only Ski Strike 7. Inside, dog-eared black and white photos showed a younger version of her, lean, sharp-eyed, standing arm in arm with 3 other elite pilots in front of a Mirage 2000 jet. On the back of the photo, written in permanent marker, "If the sky breaks, fly through it." But that folder hadn't seen the light of day in years. The story it told had faded from memory until now. As whispers of Nora's surprise return began to swirl through McCall, curiosity turned into research. A few of the base's more seasoned officers started asking quiet questions. They ran her name through secure systems. And that's when things started getting strange. There were redactions, entire pages of her service history blacked out, mission logs that skipped numbers, engagement reports that listed total success, but no further detail. And in one particular document marked I as only, someone had handwritten, confirmed visual Benghazi airspace 2012, solo recon pilot Wraith, outcome mission complete, details classified, word spread. She wasn't just some former instructor with a dusty uniform and a stubborn streak. She had been deployed in some of the most volatile corners of the globe, flying reconnaissance where satellites failed, dropping payloads where politics forbade it, and escorting convoys through territory no one admitted existed. But Nora never brought any of that up. She didn't correct the pilots who scoffed at her. She didn't wear her medals, or even keep them as far as anyone knew. She just showed up, worked, maintained her aircraft, and when asked what she was doing, she replied with the same calm every time: "I maintain readiness." Still, among the new generation of pilots, those born after most of her missions had already been buried, there were doubts that made them uneasy. Because they couldn't make sense of her. She wasn't seeking attention, but she demanded respect. She didn't ask to fly, but she did. She didn't smile, but she wasn't bitter either. It was Lieutenant Illy Travers, the same hotshot who had once called her Grandma, who began spending his breaks standing near the hangar doors, just watching her work. She never acknowledged him. She didn't need to. He'd noticed how she traced the frame of her Rafale with gloved fingertips, like she was reading a story written in steel. how she adjusted her tools with the kind of care most people reserved for a family Bible. There was reverence in the way she handled that aircraft, like she wasn't just preparing for a flight, but remembering one, or 100. One night, Ely found her still in the bay after most of the crew had gone. Rain tapped against the steel roof in quiet rhythm. She was sitting beneath the wing of aircraft 09, staring out across the empty runway, lost in thought. "Captain," he said softly, almost apologetically. She turned. "I looked you up," he continued. "The name Wraith? It's in some old briefing notes. You flew solo in Badlands I didn't even know we had maps for." Nora didn't nod, didn't smile, just studied him. "Those weren't joyrides," she said. "They were last resorts, but you made it back." Sometimes a pause. Then she added, "Not everyone did." Ely said nothing more. He didn't need to. By that point, word had spread far beyond the flight line. The base commander knew. The intel officers knew. And by the time she stepped onto the tarmac for her solo formation flight, just like she'd quietly penciled in days earlier, every single person at McCall Air Base knew they weren't watching a relic. They were watching a legend in motion. And though no one would dare say it to her face, every young pilot now understood, you don't laugh at a ghost in the sky. You follow her. They still didn't know what to make of her. After the rumors, after the folder marked "Eyes Only," after the name Wraith began circulating through the hallways like a forgotten war story told too late, even then, many weren't quite ready to believe. Captain Nora Whitlock didn't care. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She'd already faced enemies whose names had never been written down, and flown missions so far off the books were burned afterward. So when she stepped quietly into the back of the mission briefing room that Wednesday morning, no one expected her to stay. She was dressed the same way as always. No frills, flight jacket zipped just below the collarbone, sleeves rolled once at the cuffs, hair tied back with precision. No rank on display, just presence. The room was crowded with young officers, second lieutenants and fresh captains, still carrying the adrenaline of training flights on their breath. They were gathered around digital projection screens filled with terrain maps, atmospheric drift models, and live radar patterns. The instructor, a tall former Navy flyer named Captain Dorsey, stood at the front, pointer in hand, voice booming with confidence. "Okay," he said, clicking the remote. A new slide appeared. Crosswind vectors above 3,000 feet. Let's say you're pulling an inverted roll maneuver while caught in a 35-knot crosswind. What's your first move? Silence. Some glanced at one another. A few scrolled their tablets, pretending to search, but no one spoke. From the back of the room, a single hand lifted, steady, quiet, and unshaking. Dorsey paused. His eyes found her. Nora stood slowly, not with defiance but with poise. Her voice was calm, with that seasoned, gravelly timbre that didn't ask for authority. It already had it. "You don't roll," she said. "You'll lose lateral control and destabilize the yaw. You split the angle instead. Ease off the throttle. Angle the nose about 8 degrees left. Let the wind work with you." The room was still. Then Dorsey nodded, just once. "That's correct." Nobody laughed, not anymore. From that moment on, something changed. The same young pilots who had once mocked her began watching her from the corners of their eyes. Not openly, at first, but with growing interest. Questions they didn't have answers to, she seemed to know without thinking. Situations they'd only seen in simulators, she had flown through in real storms, real skies, and real danger. They started noticing where she went after the meetings. Always to the far end of the base, behind Hangar 6, where aircraft 09, the Rafale C she had claimed, was parked in semi-retirement. It had scars along the wing root and pitting on the canopy glass. Most had written it off as a glorified relic. But not Nora. She treated that jet like a living thing, like a partner. They saw her cleaning the undercarriage by hand, kneeling on old rubber pads. She checked fluid lines with a flashlight in her mouth, wiped sensor panels with a clean cloth, and even polished the nose cone like someone might do to a headstone. To her, it wasn't maintenance. It was memory. Late at night, she ran drills solo, recalibrated the heads-up display herself, practiced startup sequences blindfolded. It wasn't just muscle memory. It was commitment, ritual, And young Lieutenant Ely Travers, the one who had once cracked jokes about her age, now found himself lingering nearby more often than not. Not to tease, not even to talk, just to watch. He wasn't alone. Sometimes a crowd would gather near the coffee station across the flight line, pretending to check reports or chat, while their eyes drifted toward Nora and that battered old Rafale. They noticed how she moved, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Every action she made had purpose, not just precision but intimacy. As though she could hear the aircraft breathing. What is she even doing here? One tech whispered one morning, watching her test the landing gear sensors by feel alone. I thought she was grounded back in 2011. She was, said another. But look at her. That's not some vet on a nostalgia trip. That's someone waiting for something. Their tone had changed. Gone were the cheap shots and rolled eyes. In their place a quiet respect they didn't fully understand yet. Still, Nora said little. She didn't give speeches or offer unsolicited advice. But when she did speak, once maybe twice a day, it landed with weight. A sentence from her was worth a 10-minute lecture. They began calling her Mum, without thinking. The mechanics stopped asking why she was spending so much time on a jet no one else wanted. Instead, they started helping, just a little, replacing a valve, swapping a filter. She never asked. They just did it, and perhaps most telling of all, the brass started paying attention too. Colonel Ray Tannen, commander of McCall Air Base, began extending his walks toward Hangar 6 more frequently. He'd stand at a distance, arms folded, not saying a word, just watching her work like a man trying to remember something he'd forgotten. When asked if he knew who she was, he just said, "I've heard stories." Stories were all anyone had left. Her records were sealed, her missions classified. Her name, once written in ink across places most of these young men and women couldn't pronounce, was now remembered only in half, whispers. But on that tarmac, beneath the Texas sky, with her sleeves rolled up and her hands in the guts of a jet everyone else had abandoned, Captain Nora Whitlock was writing a new story. And everyone knew. It wasn't over yet. The day the corridor opened, the sky over West Ridge turned the color of rusted steel, hot, thick, and mean. Weather systems weren't just shifting, they were collapsing. The radar was unreliable, communications patchy, and visibility down to under 400 feet. On any other morning, flights would have been grounded. But that morning wasn't ordinary. At 06:10, a tactical scramble was issued from McCall Air Base. Intel flagged unusual movement near a forward operations post deep within hostile terrain. No satellite coverage, no reliable drones. If anyone was going to reach it in time, it would have to be done the hard way nap of the Earth, no radar, no support. The room was packed with pilots, gear on, visors clipped, blood pumping. A mix of sharp youth and seasoned nerves, all listening as Commander Miles Renner paced the ops floor. "Corridor window is narrow," he said, tapping the digital map. "We're hugging terrain the whole way. Altitude limit is 350 feet. No long-range visuals, no second passes. Once you're in, you're committed." There were nods, a few brave smirks. And then someone muttered just loud enough to hear, "Good luck getting the old timer through that meat grinder." Across the room, seated against the wall in full flight gear, Captain Nora Whitlock slowly lifted her eyes. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. A moment later, Commander Renner glanced up from the briefing tablet. "Whitlock," he said, with all the gravity of someone remembering who she was. "You're shadow lead. You fly clean, don't engage unless our lead fails." A few eyebrows raised. Lieutenant Jonah Keats, a cocky but skilled 28-year-old slated as formation lead, cleared his throat. "We sure she's still got it?" he asked, trying to keep it light. Nora turned to face him directly. Her voice was low, firm, steady. "You better fly perfectly, Lieutenant." He didn't respond, not with words, just a tight nod, the kind that says, "Message received." 30 minutes later, 6 Rafale jets lined up on the tarmac, engines humming like caged thunder. The fog had thickened. Visibility was bad. Tension worse. As they launched one by one, their flight names echoed over comms: Vulture 1, Ghost 2, Phoenix 4. Shadow 3 ready, came Nora's voice, clear, precise. The name fit. The ghost they once laughed at had taken her place in the formation, wings tucked in tight, heart steady. Once airborne, the mission changed. Fast. Within 5 minutes, all comms past checkpoint Echo went dark. Ground-based jammers likely mobile. The corridor they were navigating, a twisting pass through a desert gorge, was infamous for eating transmissions and shredding radar returns. It was now eyes, hands, and instinct. Up ahead, Lieutenant Keats' jet began to wobble slightly on a descending crosswind turn, too wide too soon. Rookie nerves, Nora didn't panic. Her left hand hovered near the manual eject override, ready if he drifted into cascade failure. But he recovered, barely. Then came the drone. It launched from the hills 2 miles to the east, small, fast, unmanned Recon class. Not armed but dangerous, not for what it carried, but for what it would reveal. In the cockpit of Shadow 3, Nora spotted it first, pure instinct. No one called it out, no one had time. In one fluid motion, she peeled left, slicing under Keats' wing, rolling 45 degrees into the dust haze. The recon drone zipped through the air like a needle through fabric. Nora didn't chase it. She anticipated. She flicked weapons control with her thumb, armed the short-range burst pod, and fired without a lock. Just aim. Just trust. The sky lit up. The drone exploded midair in a spray of white-hot fragments, fire curling into the dusty wind. Keats' voice crackled over short range. "What the hell was that?" "Scout," Nora replied evenly. Eyes open, lead. They pressed on. Now the terrain narrowed. Walls of rock on either side, updrafts bouncing the formation like ping-pong balls. Nora made micro-adjustments, tiny angle shifts, throttle taps, moves so subtle the others didn't even notice she was keeping them stable. But she was. Then came the real threat. An alert flickered on her right. Hadu ground-based launch. Radar paint, triangulation, missiles inbound, 3 of them. Keats panicked first, veering too wide. One missile peeled after him. Nora didn't panic. She pushed her Rafale into a gut-punching dive, pulling 7 Gs. Her body slammed into the seat like an anchor dropped at 500 miles an hour. Rock walls zipped past her canopy like blurs in a nightmare. She inverted, then re-righted. 1 missile overshot. The second stayed locked. She slowed down, throttled down intentionally. A death move for anyone else. But she wasn't just anyone. The missile, dumb and hungry, overshot its target. And the third, she waited for the lock drift, then deployed countermeasures. Chaff released not ahead, but behind. A perfect arc. The warhead detonated in the wake. The blast rocked her jet, but didn't touch her. When she pulled up again, the formation was scattered. But she had kept the corridor open. Had made it through alone, with the mission still intact. As dust cleared ahead, the objective came into view. A remote forward base, under siege, medevac pad in flames. Nora didn't flinch. She re-centered, checked her targeting vector. From behind, Keats' voice finally came through the static, lower now, humbled, Shadow 3, thank you. Nora said nothing. There wasn't time, and besides, she didn't fly for thanks. She flew because she knew how. And now the others finally knew what she really was. Not washed up, not outdated, but indispensable. 3 days after the corridor mission, the base was still buzzing. Captain Nora Whitlock hadn't spoken a word about what happened in the gorge. She hadn't mentioned the evasive rolls, the perfect missile deflection, or the drone she vaporized with a blind burst shot. She hadn't given a single interview or accepted a single handshake. She just wiped down her jet, ran diagnostics like always, and slipped back into the quiet. But the others couldn't forget. The younger pilots, especially Lieutenant Jonah Keats, looked at her differently now. She was no longer the strange old woman with the weathered flight suit. She was something else, something they didn't yet have a word for. Not quite legend, not yet myth, but close. Then the storm came. It arrived earlier than forecast, thick, violent, and unforgiving. Clouds rolled in like a cavalry charge. By noon, the sky had turned gunmetal gray, and sheets of rain pounded the tarmac hard enough to blur the runway lights. Inside the control tower, technicians scrambled as communications began cutting out. One of the outbound patrols, Echo Flight 3, had lost contact midway through a visual recon sweep along the southern coastline. Turbulence had battered them. Lightning had cracked too close. Then static, then silence, no signal, no radar return, just a blip fading over choppy coastlines and storm-sealed skies. Colonel Ray Tannen stood behind the comm station, eyes locked on the monitor. "We've lost eyes," the technician said, voice tight. "I think he's trying to climb, but he's too damaged." "Where is he?" Tannen asked. "Somewhere over Sector 9, Winds too heavy for the drones to follow. We need someone in the air. Now, the colonel barked. Visual only. Someone who can fly by feel. No one volunteered. Not one hand rose. The room full of skilled pilots stayed silent. Then a shadow moved near the far wall. Captain Nora Whitlock stepped forward, zipped up her rain-dampened flight jacket, and nodded once. Nothing dramatic, nothing showy. She didn't wait for orders. She just moved. Within minutes, Hangar 6 came alive. Ground crew cleared the path, water splashing at their boots as Aircraft 09, her battered but beloved Rafale, roared to life like a war horse reawakened. Lightning arsed across the horizon. The radio hissed. Wind screamed like it wanted to peel metal off bone. But the Rafale lifted anyway, clawing into the storm like it belonged there. Shadow 3 is airborne, came the voice from the tower. Inside the cockpit, Nora flew low, dangerously low, riding the coastline like a bloodhound on scent. Gusts slammed the fuselage. Warnings flashed, but her hands didn't waver. Every switch was familiar. Every dial memorized. Then, through a break in the storm, she saw it. Echo 3. The jet limped in the rain, smoke trailing from one of its turbines. It was flying too high, barely holding trim. The pilot inside, a young recruit named Lieutenant Dean Raskin, was visibly panicking. Through the blurred canopy, Nora could see his hands moving erratically. Slapping the comms, fighting the stick, she throttled forward and slid him beside him, canopy to canopy, maybe just 50 feet apart. Rain streamed down both jets in silver sheets. She flipped on her external lights, then gave a single slow roll to the left, an old school signal used when radio fails. Follow me. Inside Echo 3, Raskin's eyes widened. He looked like a kid who had just seen a ghost, and in many ways he had. He nodded stiffly, then banked slightly, aligning his jet with hers. Nora dropped lower, guiding them under the worst of the clouds, riding the storm's edge like threading a needle through a cyclone. Turbulence knocked the jet side to side. At one point, Echo 3's damaged stabilizer caught a gust and dipped. Nora adjusted instantly, her own wing moving in tight formation, correcting the airflow for both aircraft. The tower watched breathlessly. Claw 1 and Echo 3 approaching runway. Came the report. God, she's bringing him in, someone whispered. In the air, the final approach was suicide winds cross, cutting the tarmac, visibility down to a quarter-mile, rain hammering the canopy so hard it sounded like hail. But then, like it had been waiting for her, a pocket opened in the clouds. Nora dropped her landing gear. Echo 3 followed. Her wheels hit first clean. Balanced, Echo 3 touched down behind her, skidding briefly, then locking in. The base exhaled. Inside the tower, no one spoke. They just watched as both jets rolled to a stop near Hangar 6. The air was thick with silence. Rain still fell, but softer now, like the storm itself had lost its nerve. Lieutenant Raskin was helped out of his cockpit by medics. His hands shook. His eyes were wide. She saved me. He kept muttering. She saved me. Nora didn't wait for the thanks. She shut down her Rafale, climbed out, and walked back toward the hangar in her soaked flight suit. Helmet under her arm, expression unreadable, no speech, no drama, no victory lap, just a ghost, fading into the rain, after finishing what needed to be done. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind carried more weight than thunder. Back at McCall Air Base, word of the rescue traveled faster than the wind. The entire flight line had watched as Captain Nora Whitlock, the woman once dismissed as a relic, had pierced through 70-mile-per-hour winds and driving rain to guide a crippled jet and a terrified young pilot safely back to ground. She had done it alone, without backup, without hesitation, and without asking for credit. That night, while most of the squadron ate quietly in the mess hall or checked radar logs in the ready room, Nora sat alone in Base 6. Her Rafale still dripped with rainwater. The old jet, tail number 09, had survived another round just like its pilot. She didn't know it yet, but back in the command wing, someone was finally reading her story. The folder was old, dog-eared and stamped with CONFIDENTINML-LVL6 CEL SKYPRJECT. It had been misfiled in the archives beneath decades of mission summaries and performance evaluations. But during post-flight documentation of the rescue, Lieutenant Kara Keller, an intelligence liaison known for her sharp eye and sharper curiosity, had come across it. She hadn't expected much, just another background check, maybe a forgotten flight log. But as she opened the first page and began to read, Her fingers stopped mid-turn. Photos. Black and white. Some so grainy they looked like they were taken through dust storms. In each one, a younger Nora, then known only by her classified call sign, Wraith, stood in front of various aircraft. A Mirage 2000 in Kandahar, a modified Hornet in Eastern Europe, a night cam shot from over the Sahel, the background a blur of heat and smoke. Her record wasn't just long, it was legendary. Operation after operation. Missions across 3 continents. 0 confirmed losses under her command. Reconnaissance deep into enemy airspace. Strike coordination under blackout protocols. Extreme weather flight testing in volatile conflict zones. She had flown into firestorms, over mountains barely mapped, through airspace no nation claimed. But everyone feared. And the most astonishing part, almost none of it had ever been acknowledged. Because Nora hadn't just been a pilot. She had been a tactical flight systems tester for Silent Sky, a covert program developed to trial unconventional aerial strategies and pilot-machine interface under extreme conditions. A unit that didn't officially exist, on paper or in the minds of most. Her missions had shaped how modern squadrons flew. Her input had influenced training doctrine still taught at the academy, and she never said a word about it. By morning, the folder landed on the desk of Colonel Ray Tannen. The base commander had seen many things in his 30-year career. But as he read through the sealed reports, his jaw tightened. She ran solo coordination during the blackout in Benghazi, he asked aloud. Keller nodded. Took out 2 mobile installations with no radar, no escort, in under 8 minutes. Landed with under 12 gallons of fuel remaining. Tannen shook his head, almost in disbelief. And no one knew. She never told anyone, Keller said. She didn't have to. The colonel stared out the window, watching maintenance crews ram aircraft ZO-9 across the runway. Nora stood beside them, helmet tucked under one arm, jacket zipped up to her neck. She was looking at the sky, not fondly, not longingly, just ready. She never lost her rank, Keller added. All the paperwork says active clearance, just buried. Tannen didn't reply. He simply opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a spare flight jacket, older, weathered, with a patch on the shoulder that hadn't been worn in over a decade. The insignia was faded but unmistakable, a silver falcon perched on a Silent Sky, wings spread wide in defiance. The emblem of the Silent Sky tactical unit. He ran his fingers across it, then looked to Keller. Have it cleaned. And tell the tailor we'll need a patch re-stitched. The next morning, McCall Air Base was quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens when something important is about to be said. There was no formal ceremony. Just the squadron, lined up on the runway at dawn. No brass bands. No podium speeches. Just silence in the wind. Captain Nora Whitlock walked between 2 rows of young pilots, each standing at attention. There were no more sideways glances. No more whispers. Only straight backs, salutes held sharp, and eyes that followed her like she was something holy. At the end of the line, Colonel Tannen stepped forward, holding the restored jacket. Nora, he said, voice low, this was always yours. She accepted it without a word, slid her arms through the sleeves like she was putting on skin she hadn't worn in years. It fit perfectly. As she turned to leave, one of the youngest airmen, barely 22, spoke softly, Mom. Is it true they used to call you Wraith? Nora paused. Her answer was a quiet smile, the kind that says yes, but I don't need to tell you why. In Hangar 6, just before the noon maintenance shift, a mechanic opened a maintenance panel on aircraft ZO-9 to adjust a sensor, only to find something wedged inside. A photo. Laminated, old, edges yellowed. 4 pilots standing in front of a jet with no tail number. Their arms around each other's shoulders. Nora at the center, younger, sterner, but unmistakable. On the back, in faded ink, if the sky breaks, fly through it. The base commander had it framed and mounted inside the hangar, just above the bay where aircraft ZO-9 rested between missions. They added one more thing beside it, etched in steel, mounted with quiet pride WRIH. And from that day forward, every new pilot at McCall Air Base passed beneath it before they ever took the sky. The wind was calm that morning. No jets thundered across the sky. No maintenance crews shouted over engines. Even the Texas sun seemed to rise a little slower, as if honoring the stillness that had settled over McCall Air Base. Every member of the squadron stood at attention on the tarmac. No medals jingled. No generals barked. This wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. At the far end of the line, Captain Nora Whitlock stepped into view. Her boots hit the concrete with that familiar, grounded rhythm. Not rushed, not proud, just steady. She wore a flight jacket older than most of the airmen standing in formation. But this time there was something different, the patch. Newly restored. Hand-stitched. The emblem of the long-defunct Silent Sky Tactical Unit. A silver falcon over an open horizon, wings stretched wide, eyes facing forward. It wasn't issued, it was earned. And now, it was back where it belonged. Colonel Ray Tannen stood beneath the American flag, arms folded, his face uncharacteristically still. He didn't give a speech. There were no flowery words, no pretense. Instead, he stepped forward and extended his hand. "Captain Whitlock," he said. "Welcome home." She took the handshake. Firm, direct, then turned to face the squadron. Dozens of young pilots, some who once laughed, some who once whispered, now stood frozen, their hands at their brows in crisp salutes. No one missed. Even the greenest recruit saluted like he was facing the president himself. Nora gave a single nod. Then, as if it had been choreographed by nature itself, a soft gust of wind picked up her jacket hem. The patch shimmered for just a moment in the morning sun. It was official now. She wasn't just a name whispered in the shadows of old mission logs. She wasn't just the aging pilot who refused to go quietly. She was legend, reinstated, reclaimed, respected. Later that day, in the stillness of Hangar 6, 2 technicians wheeled back aircraft ZO-9 after a full systems test. The jet had flown nearly flawless during its last outing in the storm. The hydraulics purred. The avionics sparkled. The paint still carried a few scorches near the underwing, but it wore them proudly. One of the senior crew chiefs stood nearby, clipboard in hand. "You sure about this name?" he asked quietly. Across the bay, Colonel Tannen smiled faintly. "It's not just a name," he said. "It's a message." He walked up to the forward nose cone and pressed a brass plaque into place. Freshly cast, polished to a mirror finish. Rivets snapped in. 4 bold letters etched into the steel, Legion DONE. That was the new call sign for the Rafale that had survived the corridor, outrun 3 missiles, saved a recruit in the storm, and carried its pilot into the fire and back. No decals, no pinstripes, no kill count stenciled near the canopy. Just 2 words that told every soul on base exactly what this aircraft was and who flew it. Above the hangar doors, another plaque was mounted the same day. It was simpler. A brushed metal plate, square and clean, with a single engraving WRAH, no rank, no dates, no branch insignia. Just the name that once made enemies sweat over sonar, and now made airmen pause at the threshold of their careers. Every new pilot entering that hangar would see it. They would touch it, and they would understand that courage wasn't about age, or flair, or rank. It was about showing up over and over again, even when no one was watching. Especially then, that evening, as the sun dipped below the western hills and long shadows stretched across the tarmac, Nora stood alone in the observation deck, overlooking the flight line. She watched a pair of young lieutenants run pre-checks on a new twin-engine trainer. Their voices buzzed with excitement, their eyes darting between instruments and manuals. They moved fast, nervous, bright. She smiled. Not because she missed it, but because she understood it. Behind her, the door creaked. Colonel Tannen stepped inside, holding a small envelope. "We thought you should have this," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a photo, old, creased, and laminated. It was the same photo found behind the panel in her Rafale. 4 pilots. Shoulder to shoulder, uniforms wrinkled, smiles crooked, eyes hard, and in the center, her, written on the back, faded but legible, "If the sky breaks, fly through it." She traced the words with one finger, then slipped the photo into her jacket pocket, close to her chest. 2 weeks later, another mission came down. Urgent. Tactical response needed. The control tower lit up, orders flew, pilots scrambled, and as the engines roared to life on Base 6, a lieutenant turned from the comms desk and said what everyone was already thinking. "Legend 1 is moving." Down on the tarmac, Nora Whitlock climbed back into her Rafale. The canopy sealed shut with a hiss. Her gloved hands moved over the controls with ease. The turbines screamed. The air shifted, and just before she lifted off, one voice in the tower whispered, half reverent, half awed, "You don't question a ghost in the sky. You follow her?" There's a moment in every life when the world seems to move on without us. The doors that once opened with a nod now stay closed. The respect we earned becomes quiet. Our names are still known, but no longer called. Captain Nora Whitlock knew that feeling. She walked into a room full of younger, louder, faster voices, and no one remembered who she was. They saw gray hair, old boots, and silence. What they didn't see was the fire still burning behind her calm, the experience written into every line on her face. The storm she had flown through? Not just in the sky, but in life. And then came the moment that everything was tested. A mission, a storm, a pilot lost in chaos. And she rose, not because she needed to prove herself, because she had never stopped being ready. Her story reminds us of something vital, especially for those of us who've weathered years, faced loss, carried burdens. No one talks about your value is not defined by your age. Your worth does not have an expiration date. Your quiet strength may one day be someone's only lifeline. Even when people forget, even when they underestimate you, keep showing up. Because sometimes, the storm doesn't need the fastest hand or the loudest voice. It needs the calm, steady presence of someone who's been there before. Someone like you. So if you've ever been told you're too old, too late, or no longer needed, remember Captain Whitlock, and let that be your answer. Now it's your turns. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? Have you had to prove, maybe even to yourself, that you still matter? We want to hear your story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. You never know who you might inspire. And if this story moved you, even just a little, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these voices alive, these truths remembered, and these quiet heroes honored. Because we believe in one thing above all: legends never retire. They just wait for the next sky to rise.